Welcome to 409 Solutions podcast Data Dump. I'm Sarah Krom, managing partner of SKC & Co. CPAs and shareholder of 409 Solutions. Today, we are going to talk about the not so new concept of remote work. We can all agree that this is now part of the new world that we live in, and it's all going to always include some level of remote work. So how do we execute this efficiently from both the employer side and the employee side? Today, I'm joined by 409 Solutions Chief Data Scientist, Trevor Liss, and he is going to unpack the current tech available on both the employee and the employer side to make working remotely more efficient. So welcome, Trevor.
Welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, we're happy to have you. And I think it's super appropriate that this is the topic that you're covering today because you are 409 Solutions fully remote team member working from Colorado.
Yep, that I am. And I think that we've learned a lot trying to kind of get that to a place where it can really work efficiently. And I think we have some good things to share about kind of the things that we've discovered along the way.
Yeah, so you actually live and breathe this every day with your team. So share with us, what tools do you think are essential for effective remote work, especially for a small company like SKC or like 409?
Absolutely. And I think that the first thing that comes to mind when I think about the tools that we want to use for remote work is almost a cloud first mindset. It's kind of something that we've talked a lot about when we were setting up our business and how it was going to work internally. And the idea was that whatever we're doing, it needs to be possible anywhere seamlessly. So any tools or anything that we rely on that is location based or requires anybody to be anywhere physically is something that we wanted to shy away from. And there are a few tools that all companies use that they might not be using to the full ability for remote work. Or they just might not have explored that aspect of it as much. So for us, the big ones are the standard ones. I mean, using Microsoft Teams, we're on Teams all the time, and it's our primary way of communicating together. It's really great because any files that we're going to share on there, they can just send something my way. I can send it back, and we don't need to worry about, oh, do we have the same version? Is everything up to date? It's all right there in the history. And then the other one we use that a lot of companies use these days is OneDrive, but we really use OneDrive to the maximum that it can be used. Obviously, we are a company that involves a lot of tech that does a lot of engineering. So having the ability to keep all of our code, all of our in progress projects and files in a communal space so that it's not a matter of, oh, I did this and now I need to send you the file so that you can do this. Everything just exists in the same file land is just absolutely amazing. And that kind of benefit of not having any sort of physical hardware or a shared drive that somebody needs to maintain has been absolutely life-changing for us and letting us work on the go wherever we need to.
So you really touched on two big things there. One was communication, right? Which you said you guys leverage team, and the other
Yep.
was accessibility. So where is your data living? Where are the softwares that you manipulate and utilize everyday living? And that for you guys is the cloud. What do you guys specifically use as the data engineers and the analytics that you work with? What supports your work as a data engineer with 409?
Absolutely. So our entire environment runs in Microsoft Azure. And I think that that is one of the better business decisions that we made when we first started this venture. Microsoft Azure is kind of the back end part of the Microsoft cloud. Everybody's familiar with Outlook, with Word, with PowerPoint, with Teams. But when you start talking about how does data flow from point A to point B? How do I report on that data? Where does my website live? How do I interact with it? And where do things go when I submit a form? All of that lives in kind of the cloud backend, and for us, we use Azure. And what's so beneficial about that is that it really can be done from anywhere. And we've lost this reliance on, oh, this piece of server technology needs to work, or oh, I need to update this piece of software, and everything that we do is going to be down for 24 or 48 hours. This always online, constant availability has really created a mindset for us when we work. One thing that I do a lot is I set up data pipelines. There's some software over here, and we need to get this data to some place so that we can report on it. And these pipelines, if we were running them physically, we'd need to run them during the workday. And there's a pretty inherent conflict with that because people are updating their data during the workday. If you want to agree with what you think the data should say, you need to have a live copy of it. So something that we've started doing is basically my entire job, all of my outputs happen at like 2 in the morning. I set things up to automate and then they just go. And I wake up in the morning and I check to make sure that everything worked. But it's only because we have this cloud first mentality that really came from us needing to be flexible for remote work that allowed us to disconnect everything from anything physical. It can run whenever it wants to because the server is always online. And that's been so helpful for everybody.
I mean, that sounds like a best practice, even if you weren't in Colorado and the home base of 409 wasn't in New Jersey, right? If you guys were still all in the same location, it still seems like that would be a best practice to implement.
Oh, absolutely. But it's a practice that might not be obvious if everybody's in the office every day because you're all there and let's just have the machine there that we can work on, which seems great until you start having hardware problems or reliancy or updates. And being able to step away from that is an idea we only had because of remote work, and it's really been successful for us.
Hmm. And the other aspect too, you talk about the the downtime essentially, or the runtime being at 2 a.m. when you're presumably sleeping. The other interesting part about you being in Colorado is you're on a different time zone. You're in a different time zone than in the New Jersey base, right?
Oh, yeah.
So SKC has an employee in Indiana and a few employees in California. So everybody's a little bit different in how they like to work. We have some team members who kind of stay on East Coast time just because it works for their schedule. But for you guys, I think it gives you a little bit more flexibility in what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And it really helps too because we have clients that are everywhere and we have clients that are out in the mountain time or out on the West Coast. And when you are working with clients in the West Coast and you're on the East Coast, you lose 6 hours of potential meeting time just from the crossover. So
Mm.
having somebody here where I can be like, oh, yeah, I'll take that meeting at 4 o'clock my time because it's good for them at 4 o'clock. And we don't have to worry about somebody being in the office in New Jersey at 6 p.m. It's been absolutely amazing for us to kind of get things more organized and be able to stay more on top of things. A lot of things tend to break either first thing in the morning or right at the end of the day. So having people who have that flexibility has really been beneficial to us to always have availability, especially with a small team.
So let's transition to some of the remote work productivity tips that you have. And again, we mentioned that you do work fully remote. You come to New Jersey maybe 4 or 5 times a year to work with the team. But from your perspective, what are some of the tips and best practices for staying productive and organized while you are fully remote from the team?
Absolutely. I think the first one and the biggest one for us as a team has been time blocking. It's something that we kind of started doing right when I started being remote full time. And not only does it really, really help us align our schedules because I have all three of our calendars open. I can go check our calendar and be like, oh, okay, so he's going to be getting to this next Thursday. And now I know, and I don't have to go ask him, and we don't have to be on the same page because we already are on the same page because I can go look at it. And it also makes it so that we kind of hold ourselves accountable in a way. One of the big issues, and I want to talk about this a little bit more later with working remotely, is accountability and how you manage accountability.
Mm.
And time blocking has been great for us for that because they don't need to ask me what I'm going to be doing. They can go look at my calendar and it says what I'm going to be doing. And not only that, it's great for managing your meeting time versus your non-meeting time. When you start being very client facing, all of a sudden meetings start popping up all over the place. And having what you need to get done this week blocked out as physical time units makes it so much easier to put those things into their place or to be like, I can't meet with you this week. I have too many things that need to get done, and being able to schedule things appropriately. So time blocking's been amazing for us. I have two others that we use pretty consistently. One is that we do weekly and sometimes multiple times weekly stand-up meetings. So anybody who's studied or learned about Agile before and kind of how that workflow works knows what a stand-up meeting is. But it's essentially at the beginning of the day, or for us, we tend to do it at the beginning of the week. It's a 15 to 30-minute meeting where it's just, what did you do? What are you going to get done? What support do you need? And these are the things that naturally get discussed if everybody's in an office environment. But when you may not have that face-to-face time, putting it on the calendar and having that call really helps get us all on the same page. So that's been great for us when we're trying to plan things out. We've actually gone from doing them once a week to doing them 3 times a week as our workload has increased and there's more things to keep track of. The final thing in terms of remote work productivity that's been game changing for me, and it's something that I've read in a few books, I've seen kind of told to me a few times, but I never really internalized it until I did it, was the physical separation of your workspace from your not workspace. So this is a little bit different than a strategy, I would say. But it is a massive psychological help to have a space in your home that is for work. As soon as it's way too easy when you work remotely to be like, I'm going to bring my laptop up on the couch because I want to be on the couch right now. And that's well and good until you can't either get off the clock or you can't get on the clock because you're on your couch. It doesn't matter. You're on your couch either way. So one thing that I did when I had my most recent move was I made a very clear and obvious office space that I use for nothing else but work. So when I step in here in the morning, I may as well be that I'm at work. And for us, when we need certain hours of availability because we're so interdependent as a team, it's been very valuable for them to be like, he's on from here to here, and it's very consistent. And that separation has been the whole thing that's helped me so much there.
Yeah, that's the mindset shift, right? That's just the perspective of having this space is my office. I'm now going to work.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, you said something that later on you want to talk a little bit about accountability. And I feel like the sort of the companion or the sister to accountability is communication. And you talked a little bit about using Teams as a chat mechanism for communicating with your team. Share with us, if you will, some of your personal experience of having being fully remote out in Colorado and then staying connected to the New Jersey team, because that's really the importance, is that communication. And again, that kind of shifts over into accountability. But did you learn that, or did you get better at that because a good portion of your college term was in the COVID timeframe?
Absolutely. And that was what I was going to bring up. I think that it was very eye-opening for me, and a lot of people who have been professionals a little bit longer, who aren't quite as young as I am, don't really understand what the impact of being in college during COVID was. Everybody all at once being forced to do everything remote really exposed what people's weaknesses are in terms of communication when you're not all in the same place.
Mm.
A few big things I noticed right off the bat when everything first shut down, we all come back to school and everything is remote all of a sudden is people don't know when things are due. People don't know when lecture is. People don't know when the tests are. And it was a very consistent thing for this first semester where the messages were just getting lost in translation. They're like, oh, do I go check this page? Am I supposed to be getting this in my email? What is the unified form of communication? And that kind of evolved throughout college. So for my college experience, I went to the University of Colorado Boulder. They used a system called Canvas, and they went from kind of using it when I first started to when COVID really kicked in to this is how everything works. And it took them a year to get to that point. But while I was observing that, it made me realize that having an agreed upon communication system was probably the most important thing for keeping everybody in the know, especially as things get complex and they grow. So I'm during that time, I was actually working part-time at SKC before we spun off in the 409. And Ryan and I were going through the same sort of process of how are we going to communicate effectively? I mean, sometimes he texts me, sometimes he email me, sometimes he teams me. And we really ended up landing on the same sort of separation that I was talking about between work and home life, which is that if we're texting each other, it's about something casual or it's about schedules outside of work hours. Teams is for things that need to get done, and emails are for things that need to go to clients. It's a very simple system, but we've all agreed on it at this point, and it means that you know what to look at, right? Something that is on Teams is the same as if somebody rolled up to you in the office and was like, oh, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. It's a short-term thing, and then you can still reserve email for the way that you use email when you're in an office. But having those rules around communication, what is for what, has helped not only separate when we're working versus when we're not working when I'm remote, but also having that one piece of communication. This is how we talk to each other. And that's been really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention, and in this case, it's the mother of creating the process around communication, right? And I
Absolutely.
think you guys put together a really great process to follow. I know even on the SKC side, we have email, we have Teams, we have text. From a client communication standpoint, we have the relationships with the client to know their preferred method of communicating, right? Text, email, phone call. But I think internally we could benefit from exactly what you're saying. When is it appropriate to text somebody versus when is it appropriate to team somebody or email them? And, I feel like everything at our fingertips on our phones typically is Teams and text messages, not everybody might be in a position where they can check their email all the time or as frequently as they could when something dings on their phone. So that's a really good, recommendation of how to have good, smooth communication amongst your team, even if you're not virtual or even if no one's on the team's remote. But I think nowadays most people are, as SKC is typically hybrid, right? Some people are in the office
Mm,
some days and not others, but for the most part, we've got to learn how to function in this remote environment because it is in all of our lives to some extent.
yeah.
So let's kind of switch a little bit on the employer side of things, right? As a business owner, what are the technologies out there that companies are using to track employees' activity, right? And that's a thing that's out there, and we're going to talk about the flip side about what employees do to avoid some of that, but because I don't actually know what are some of the mechanisms out there for employers to monitor what their employees are doing and what are some of the privacy concerns that possibly workers should be aware of.
Absolutely. And I think this is a very Gen Z topic, I would say. This is not something that I hear talked about a lot when I'm in business circles, but when I'm with people in my age group and they're talking about their first forays into work, and all of them are remote because that's the world we live in these days, it's all about what is my company doing to track me, especially at these larger firms and these larger companies.
Mm.
Really, the gold standard is Teams across the board. Everybody uses Teams for remote work, and from an employer point of view, a lot of times what makes somebody actively working is whether or not they're green on Teams, whether or not that little status bubble next to their Teams window is the green check mark or the yellow away symbol. And I have plenty of people in my age group, in my cohort, who live and die by I have to keep my Teams green, which inherently has some issues. And I think we can talk about that some more in a little bit, but just the general concept of that's how employers a lot of times are keeping track of what their employees are doing is are they on their computer? I mean, it's a very reasonable place to start is are they on their computer? But I do think that it has some flaws, but that's what a lot of people are using. And it's a good place to start too, because if you have employees that you think aren't performing to the standard that you would consider and their remote work, a very good way to check is are they actually doing anything on their computer during working hours? Because that's not a guarantee anymore in this day and age.
But is that
Um,
how Teams works? Do
Yes,
they,
it is how Teams work. So as
so
long
if
as
it senses activity, because I always thought that it was connected to your Outlook calendar. So if you were blocked off, say, for a meeting at a certain time frame, your bubble would be red because you were busy, not at your
so it
computer.
yeah, so it's both. So it is connected to your Outlook. So if you're in a meeting, for example, right now I'm looking at my Teams, I have my little red circle. And that means that you're busy, you're in a meeting. But when you don't have a meeting on your calendar, it'll show green if it senses activity on your computer, activity being poorly defined as a problem. And then if it senses no activity on your computer, it will turn yellow. It'll say that you're away. And that's after, I think it's like 3 to 5 minutes of no input on your computer. And it's a really good tracking system. And if you don't know about it and you have remote employees, good place to start. Because for all you know, especially if you have somebody who you think isn't performing to the standard that you'd expect, they're not on the computer all of the time that you might expect them to be. And it's a very easy way to check. So that is actually how Teams works. But there are some other things that companies kind of use and when we're talking about monitoring. One thing is time clocking and time cards. Now, I'm personally in favor of time clocking and time cards, but I'm also incredibly biased because I'm a data analyst and I want more data analysts. A lot of people that I know in my cohort hate filling out their time cards because it can feel tedious and it can feel almost micromanagey to be like, I did this for 10 minutes and then I did this for 10 minutes, especially if you're not directly billing that time out to clients and you're just doing it for internal monitoring. Another thing that a lot of companies, especially larger company, use is remote desktop software. So all of our laptops have the ability for IT to remote into them to fix problems, and that's very standard across the board. But a lot of companies will use that, especially if they're very large scale and they can handle big data. They will use that as an additional way to track activities. So by capturing what's on the screen, you can look in and be like, what are they working on right now? For how long did they have given windows open? There are loggers that will track that. And again, if you're an employer, that can be an invaluable tool, but there is the flip side of how that feels to be the employee when you're having everything managed. The big privacy concern for me, and I am very pro privacy in all of these things that I do, is when we start having things on our phones. A lot of people don't realize that their entire personal existence is on their phone all of the time. And sometimes they may be a little lax in allowing company policy onto their phone. And that's where, for me, things can get a little bit dicey. So I've always liked to have those things separated. Obviously, since I am in a role where I work as a business owner, a lot of the times I have all my things on my phone. But for people who are managed by large monolithic IT policy, a lot of times having your phone being tracked can be the thing that really starts to bother them. And if you are an employer, I'd recommend giving other options other than that, especially people my age. Your whole life is on your phone, and sometimes people don't really realize that.
Listen, I don't know how common it is now, but I know when I first started in, the CPA profession, it was very common for people to have two phones.
Yeah. And it's kind of common now. I have some people that I know, I have some people that are in my age group that work and they have their two phones for things, but a lot of times they're like, yeah, just put whatever you need me to put on my phone, and that's fine. And that's where I'm like, hey, you want to be very sure what they're getting from your phone if you're going to be doing something like that so that you can maintain your privacy as an employee.
Hmm. I mean, a lot of it comes down to trust, right? And
Yeah.
it goes both ways, right? As business owners, yes, for the most part, we always have the capability to go back historically and say, okay, when did you log in? When did you log off? What kind of activity was there? But there's tools, I guess we could call that team members can use to sort of beat the system, if you will, right? And
Absolutely.
this was amazing to me. I was at a conference talking with other managing partners of CPA firms, sharing war stories as we do, and they were telling me that Amazon sells these devices that allows that, you'll know it better than I do probably, that moves your mouse for you,
Mouse
that
jigglers.
that mimics activity, so that I guess you do turn green in Teams, or
Yep.
it
That's the entire
registers.
reason they exist is to keep you green in teams. People spend $20 on little vibrating devices that keep their mouses moving, mice moving. And I have multiple thoughts on this. My personal, I guess, philosophy when it comes to remote work is that accountability is only as necessary as it is to achieve your goals. So it's one thing to be being like, what did you do today? Which is what we do on our stand-up meetings, or what are you going to do? And it's another thing to be like, why were you away from your desk for 10 straight minutes? So from that point of view, that's where a lot of people my age might want to buy something like that. That being said, maybe some of them want to buy it because they want to go on a vacation down to Cabo and they don't want to take any time off work, so they just have their little mouse going the entire time. So it's something that you need to be very aware of as a business owner is that a lot of these things that, especially if you have somebody who kind of knows computers a good amount, it's trivial to beat them. I mean, I could make my team show up green 24/7 if I wanted to by using an auto clicker. And you don't got to buy the $20 device for that. And I say that freely because I believe more so in accountability through action and deliverables than I do through activity tracking. Because one thing that I've noticed and that I've seen a lot of people my age feel is that tracking is indistinguishable from micromanaging if you're an employee. Somebody being like, hey, why weren't you on at this time? That only needs to happen once or twice when you really were working and you just needed to step away for something super quick before you lose trust in the process back and forth. So it's really important to not take some of these tools at face value and appreciate kind of what they can do for you at a high level. Hey, what does their availability look like? Are they busy right now? And not at the what is my employee doing at every minute of the day, which I think most business owners know isn't the most efficient way to get productivity out of your employees.
And I think that comes down really to the integrity of the team member, right? And
Of
the
course.
culture of the company. So I can tell you, managing 25 people through SKC, we don't use any of those, I'll call them real-time monitoring devices or tools that are out there. But I have used at times to go back to historical logs because I see deliverables not being delivered, or timelines not time, deliveries not being met, deadlines not being met.
Yep.
And we're a timesheet firm, so I can go in and I can see, okay, this person is attesting to me that he or she is working, you know 5 hours on this client and 2 hours on that client. And if that work is now not done, and I go back, and this is not something I do on a consistent basis, it's something I do when there's a systemic problem over time that we're seeing with deliverables not being delivered. I go back in the logs and I can see, okay, that day that person said that they were working 7 hours, they did not work, they didn't even log into their computer.
Yep.
So that explains why none of the deliverables got delivered. But then you have a bad apple. And personally, again, managing an organization of 25 people, I'm not a fan of micromanaging. And I'm certainly not a fan of punishing the whole for a few bad apples. So
Mhm.
I think it comes down ultimately to the company culture that you want to have, and the level of trust that you have in your employees, and what you want to actually be, the situation of your organization. Because you could certainly have people who do what they're supposed to and don't really deserve to be monitored that way, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And it can feel a little bit, it can feel pressuring to have a high level of monitoring, especially if you are always on top of your things. Because I personally don't think that it's a problem if in the middle of your day you have an hour before your next meeting, oh, this is a great time. I got to go run to the store. I don't have anything else I need to do right this second. And it makes your day flow better. If that works for you, then that should work for you because you're getting your work done. And it's that simple. That being said, I think there's a difference between real-time monitoring and what you were kind of describing as historical monitoring. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm biased. I'm a data analyst. We must collect all the data. But I think that there's a reason why we collect all this data. There's a reason why these things spit out logs, and it's so that you can analyze at a high level and drill down into what specific issues are, what the efficiency of your firm is, and kind of what's happening. I mean, done internally as a team is we have what our goal capacity number is for a given month for each of the three of us, and we track our just total hours against that consistently. And it's not a, hey, why are you under your hours thing? It's a metric that we can then compare against our client work to say what projects are flowing most efficiently, what days are we going to have capacity. That was a recent conversation that we had. We were like, we want to add a weekly meeting. What day do we add it on? Well, it looks to us that on Tuesdays we end up working about an hour, on average an hour less than we do on other days. So that might be a good day for us to throw that meeting on. That's really a lot of the reason why we track our time internally, is so that we can make those high level decisions to make us more efficient as a firm, not so that we can, determine what people are doing throughout one given day. And I think that that's really the key difference when you're talking about managing remote employees.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to communication, and communicating as the employer to the team member the expectations, and that it is a results driven and a results measured organization, and understanding that, and then seeing it put into practice, and seeing if that employee has the level of integrity and the level of accountability that is necessary at your organization.
Absolutely.
So I
Um,
feel that we're not going to get out of being in a remote world. I think it's probably only going to grow, and certainly talent and crossing borders is much easier to manage when we have the capability of anybody that works in the world can work for us in certain environments. But tell us from your perspective, Trevor, what are some of the unexpected pros and cons, if you will, of having that remote work experience?
Absolutely. And I think that there are two big cons for me personally. And the first one is overall time and project management. And this is something that I've noticed even now that I've really put a lot of work into keeping myself as maximally productive when I'm remote. There's a feeling when you go into an office and you sit down for an 8 hour day that, of course, I'm going to work. What else am I going to do? I'm not going to sit at my desk in my office and scroll on TikTok, right? Like that just doesn't make sense to do. So when you're in the space where you're going to work, you work. And that can be really helpful, especially if you have a day where you have things that you really don't want to do or things that really don't need to get done right now. And that's when you can, even being a motivated employee and really caring about the outcome of your work, it can still be difficult when your TV is 10 steps away, your fridge is 10 steps away. It's nice outside. Maybe you want to step outside for a minute. It can be difficult to stay on top of that time. And that's where the accountability part comes in, because I'm not completely against accountability in any way, shape, or form, because it's natural for it to be difficult when you're in your own house to sit at your computer for 8 straight hours and type away. That can sometimes be difficult for people. So it's a matter of being results driven, like you talked about, and allowing for that flexibility without it impacting your availability. It's okay to step away for 20 minutes if you already got done this thing that needed to get out by this time, and and you don't have anything that needs to happen here, then it's okay for that to happen as long as you're meeting your goals and you're hitting your deadlines. But that can be a tight kind of edge to walk on where you don't want it can be maybe too easy sometimes to leave something slipping for an hour or two because I can just go on my phone and nobody's going to care because I'm in my own house. That's something that can be a little bit difficult to manage. The other con that I've seen is kind of actually the flip of what I just said, but how do you fill time? So I'm talking about when I have like I block off an hour for something, takes me 45 minutes, and I'm done with it. Cool. I have a meeting in 15 minutes. What do I do with those 15 minutes of my time, right? It's when you're in the office, it's easy. You go over to somebody else's desk, you're like, oh, what are you working on? Or, oh, I'm just going to close this out real quick because I have it open. But how do you manage those small bits of time effectively when there isn't anything to do necessarily? And it can be harmful to yourself as an employee because if you use those 15 minutes that happen 3 or 4 times a day maximally, you get to log off an hour earlier functionally. And keeping that tight schedule can be very, very difficult when you're working remote all the time. So that's something that I'm still kind of experimenting with. Like, how do I want to use the little bits of free time that I have? Is it worth it for me to step away from my desk? Will I struggle to mentally re-engage in what I'm doing if I do step away? These are questions that I still ask myself and I'm still working on it. Really, what I've come to the solution of is fill up a 9 hour day because that's usually what I work as a 9 hour day. And if things get done early, then sure, I can step away for 20 minutes. But starting the day, theoretically having 9 hours worth of stuff to do is the way that I like personally to manage my own time because then I know deliverables are getting done and the schedule throughout the day starts to matter a little bit less. In terms of positive things, one that's big, especially for me, when I'm in New Jersey and I'm working from the office, it's about a half-hour commute for me. I feel that hour of lost time every single day. Being able to, and since I generally work from 7 to 3 Colorado time, being able to start my day in my sweatpants and sitting down at my desk and just, start banging some stuff out is so helpful to me instead of the get ready for an hour, go drive for half an hour, and then start my day and then have to do the whole reverse process at the end of the day. You really feel that gain versus lost time when you're working remotely, which I'm sure a lot of people have experienced being hybrid. That's why so many people love being hybrid. You get the best of both worlds a lot of time. The final real positive thing that I like about working remote is how much flexibility it gives to both me and the team. So we talked about it a little bit, having differing time zones, being able to travel freely and still be able to get your work done, is absolutely amazing. I had the opportunity to go to Las Vegas a few months ago. The only time I was going to be able to make it work was during the week. And instead of having to take 3.5 days off for this vacation, I worked 2 of the days because those were the days that I was able to travel in a hotel. And it was functionally couldn't tell the difference between working in a hotel and working from my desk at home. That's a massive, massive benefit to being able to work remotely. And the final thing that I'd like to kind of tack on here is I talked at the very beginning of this about kind of having that cloud first mindset when it comes to technology. One big thing for us is since we did that, emergencies get handled a lot faster. And I'll give you an example. A few months ago, unfortunately, my girlfriend broke her finger. And part of the recovery for that was that I had to drive her to PT all the time. So in the middle of the day, I'm off at a doctor's office, right? We had one time where a major data flow failed. And a client was like, hey, what happened? Why is this wrong? And unfortunately, I'm not home right now. This is the only option is I have to drive her to this. So if we were not as cloud focused first, it would have been 3, 4 hours before I could have fully resolved that problem. But because of the way we've set up our technology, I opened up my phone, I logged into all of the stuff on all of my apps, and I was able to get everything back up and running again on my phone. Not necessarily something that everybody can do or applicable for every workflow, but having your technology exist in the cloud can make it extremely on the go when it needs to be. That wasn't the most ideal solution in the world, but it worked and it got the client problem solved faster. And That's been a benefit to remote because if I had never been remote, we would have never had things set up in a way where I could have even done that on my phone, even if I wanted to. So that was really a big win for us when we were setting things up, in my opinion.
So it goes beyond even, what's the latest technology that we can implement and what are the tools that we have and best practices. It really goes into how do you build your organization from a foundational standpoint to be able to support that remote capability is what it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the most important decision that we made right at the start is everything works everywhere. I could theoretically work an entire day off of my cell phone if I wanted to. It would be very annoying, but I could do it. And the that being possible opens everything up because it means, oh, if my laptop craps out and I'm 2,000 miles away from where I can get a new one, I can pull out any old laptop and I can make it work for a day. And that flexibility is something that a lot of people that I know just don't have, and they lose, a couple days a year, maybe a week a year of productivity from stuff breaking, and they don't have another option. So that mentality has been really, really beneficial to us as a business.
Mm. Such good insights, Trevor. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your knowledge regarding remote work with us from both, the team member standpoint and the employer standpoint. I really appreciate it.
Of course, thanks so much for having me on again, Sarah.
So thank you for tuning into this episode of Data Dump. We hope that you find inspiration in today's conversation on leveraging technology to successfully work remotely. Remember, the world of technology is full of possibilities, so never stop learning. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to share it with others, please do so. And don't forget to subscribe and rate it along with that as well. Join us next time as we continue to explore the power of technology in our ever-changing world. Thanks.